Hey everyone, in this video I'll show you how to make a tool shop. Make sure you watch to the end so you don't miss a thing. If you want access to higher quality models like you're seeing right now, head over to my Patreon. Members also get access to an exclusive channel in my Discord server where you can send your video ideas. I'll be looking at these video ideas first, so if you want me to make a video idea soon, this is perfect for you. You'll also get early access to models before the videos come out. The next video is going to be a custom inventory, which you can get right now. We'll start by getting some tools from the toolbox. Once you have your tools, head over to the replicated storage. Create a folder called Tool Shop. This will store various objects we'll need for the tool shop system. Create another folder. Name it Tools. This will store all the tools we'll have in the shop. Inside, we'll create a folder for one of the tools. Create a folder inside called Tool. Put the tool in this folder. Create a second folder called Properties. This will contain information about the tool, such as its price. Inside, create an int value. Name it Price. Set its value to the amount you want the tool to cost. Here you can see the places where the price will be shown in the GUI. Now create a string value. Its name will be display name. Set its value to whatever you want the tool to be called in the GUI. And here's where the display name is shown in the GUI. Create a second string value. Name this one Description. This value will be displayed as the description of the tool in the GUI. Create one more string value. Name it Image ID. This will store the ID for the image of the tool. We can copy the texture ID property of the tool, which is the image that shows up in the hotbar. And this is why the image ID is displayed on the GUI. Now we can duplicate this folder for the rest of the tools. Replace the tool folder's contents for each folder. Then change the values in the properties folder to match the tool. If a tool doesn't have a texture ID, like this flashlight, you'll have to upload your own image or find one in the toolbox. Once you've found your image, click the three dots and select Copy Asset ID. Paste the ID into the value. When you have just a number ID, you have to add RBX Asset ID : // Just the number won't work when we try to replace the image by script. Now create a script in the server script service. We'll start by creating a function for when a player joins the game. The parameter player is the player who joined. When a player joins, we'll create their stats folder. We can name it whatever we want. If you want the stats to show in the player list, name it leader stats. Then we'll create the currency value, which will be an int value. Again, we can name it whatever we want. Here I've gone with cash. We can change its value. Whatever we put here is the cash players will have upon joining the game. Parent the value to the stats folder. And finally, we'll parent the stats folder to the player. This function will run in response to the player added event of the player's service. This event fires when a player joins the game. If we test the game, we should see the cache in the player list. Since we're going to be accessing the stats folder and currency value from different scripts, it would be best to store the names of these objects somewhere any script can access. In the tool shop folder, we'll create a folder called properties. Inside, create a string value. Name it stats folder name. Set its value to whatever you named the stats folder in the script. Create a second string value. Name it currency value name. Set its value to whatever you named the currency value in the script. At the top of the script, we'll get the values stored in the properties folder. Then we can replace the names of the stats folder and currency value with these values. We should also have an easy way to increase our cache while testing the game. Let's create a part. Whenever we step on it, we want a cache increase. Let's give it a neon material and a green color. Also make sure the part is anchored so it doesn't move around when we step on it. Create a script inside the part. We'll need the values in the properties folder. We can copy the first couple of lines from the tool shop server script. Then we'll get the part we want the player to touch. In this case, it's the parent of this script. We'll also create a variable to store how much a player's cache should increase by. Now create a function to respond to whenever the part is touched. We have one parameter which tells us what touched this part. We can attempt to find a player from this part. We're using the getPlayerFromCharacter function, which will return the player associated with the character we give it. Touched part will be the body part of a character, so the character will be its parent. If touched part was some other part that doesn't belong to a character, getPlayerFromCharacter will return nil. So we'll make sure a player was found. Then we can give them the cache. This function will run in response to the touched event of the part. The event fires whenever it detects the part is being touched. So if we step on the part, although we might see it as one touch, the event will actually fire many times. And if this happens, the player will get the cache multiple times for a single touch. To prevent this, we'll add a cooldown. Create a variable called cooldown time, which is how many seconds the cooldown lasts for. Then create a variable called players on cooldown. This will be a dictionary that stores all the players on cooldown. Before we give the player cache, we'll make sure they aren't on cooldown. When we give them their cache, we'll place them on cooldown by setting their value in the dictionary to true. After that, we need to wait for the cooldown time to pass. Then we can set their value to false, meaning they are no longer on cooldown. Let's test the game to make sure it works. We can see the cache increases every time we step on the part. Back in the tool shop folder, create a folder called remote events. Inside, create a remote event called buy tool. This will allow the client to communicate to the server when they want to buy a tool. In the script, we'll get the remote event. We'll also need the tools folder. Now let's create a function to respond to when a player wants to buy a tool. This function will receive the player and the folder for the tool. We'll first make sure the tool folder variable is actually a tool folder. A normal player won't ever give us something that isn't a tool folder, but cheaters can give us anything via the remote event, which is why it's important to validate any data a player gives us. Now we need to get the price of the tool. We'll also get the player's currency value. Now we'll compare the price to the amount of currency the player has. Again, we're doing this to prevent cheaters from messing with the remote event. Now that we've verified that the purchase is legitimate, we can deduct the price from the player's currency value. We'll then get the actual tool object. The findFirstChildOfClass function is used because we don't know the name of the tool, we only know that it is a tool. Finally, we'll make a copy of the tool, which will parent to the player's backpack. We'll run this function in response to onServer event. Now let's run the game. We'll use the command bar to fire the remote event. You should find it at the bottom of the window. If not, you can go to View and enable it there. In the fire server function, we'll give the folder of the tool we want to buy. If we run the code now, we won't get a tool. This is because we don't have any cache. Let's increase our cache by stepping on the part. Now if we run the code, we'll get the tool and the price is deducted from our cache. But if we run the code a second time when we have enough cache, we'll get the tool again. We only want players to be able to buy a tool once. In the script, we'll create a dictionary called player purchases. This will store the purchases a player makes. In the onPlayerAdded function, we'll create a list for the player inside the dictionary. In the onPlayerByTool function, we'll first make sure the player hasn't bought the tool before. We're using the table.find function to search for the tool folder in this player's purchases. Again, we're doing this to stop cheaters from misusing the remote event. We'll also be doing this validation on the client to prevent normal users from doing unintended actions. If we didn't have to deal with cheaters, we'd have validation only on the client so that we can reduce the load on the server. Once we validated everything, we'll add the tool folder to the player's purchases. Now we'll create a function that will run when a player leaves the game. This function will simply remove the player's purchases. Once the player leaves, their data becomes useless, so we don't need to store it anymore. We'll run this function in response to the player removing event. Now we can test the game. I'll run the code in the command bar once, and we get the tool as expected. Now if we run the code again, nothing happens. The next thing we need to handle is saving tools when a player respawns. Right now, we'll lose all of our tools when we die. Since we've already stored the player's purchases, saving their tools will be simple. In the onPlayerAdded function, we'll respond to the characterAdded event that fires whenever the player's character spawns in. Once their character spawns in, we'll go through all the player's purchases. For each tool folder, we'll get the tool objects, create a copy of the tool and parent it to the player's backpack. Let's run the same code in the command bar to get the tool. Now we can reset our character, and we'll still have the tool after we respawn. Now that we're done with the server side, head over to the starter GUI, create a screen GUI. Inside, create a text button called Open Button. This is the button we'll use to open the shop. Let's place the button to the side of the screen. We can change its text. In the screen GUI, create a frame. Name it Shop Container. This is the shop which will be opened with the button we just created. Let's place it in the center of the screen. Inside the frame, we can create a text label for the title. This is just for decoration, we don't need it for the shop to function. We can change its X alignment to left. Now create a text button inside the frame. Name it Close Button. This will close the shop whenever we click on it. Let's give it a red color. We can place it in the top right corner. We can also change its text to X. Now create a frame called Tools Container. Let's change its color so we can see it more easily against the white background. Place it on the right. This is where we'll display all the tools. Inside, create a scrolling frame. Let's make its background invisible. Then we can resize it to fit the frame. Change its automatic canvas size to Y. This makes the scrolling frame automatically change its height to fit its contents. You can see in this example how the height of the canvas properly fits all the tools. Now we need to set the canvas size to 0 on everything. This will fit the canvas to the visible size of the scrolling frame. We're doing this because we don't have anything in the scrolling frame right now, so its canvas shouldn't be scrollable. We can also set the scrolling direction to Y because we only want vertical scrolling. Inside the scrolling frame, create a UI grid layout. This will automatically place all the elements inside the scrolling frame in a grid layout. In the example shown, you can see the tools are placed in rows and columns. Inside the shop container frame, create another frame. Name it Selected Tool Container. Let's also change its color. Place it on the left. This is where the currently selected tool will be displayed. Inside, create a text label called Tool Display Name. Let's make its background invisible. This will display the name of the selected tool. Let's add some placeholder text. Now create an image label named Tool Image. This will display the image for the selected tool. Let's also make its background invisible. Create a second text label. Name it Tool Description. This will display the description for the selected tool. Let's make its background invisible. Let's also add some placeholder text. Right now the text is too big. We can make it smaller by adding a text size constraint. Change the max text size property until you get a good result. We should also change the Y alignment of the text to top. Finally, create a text button called Purchase Button. Let's give it a green color. And give it some placeholder text. This button will display the price of the tool on it. In the scrolling frame, create a text button. Name it Tool Button. Remove its text. You can also use an image button for this. Inside, create an image label named Tool Image. This will display the image for the tool. Create a text label named Tool Display Name. This will show the name of the tool. Finally, create a text label named Tool Price. This will display the price for the tool. Let's create some duplicates of the text button so we can see how the shop will look with lots of tools. We can see the buttons don't fit properly in the scrolling frame. Go to the UI grid layout. We'll need to change the cell size property. This is the size given to any object inside the scrolling frame. Make sure we're using scale instead of offset so the size is scaled properly on different screen sizes. For the width, I've chosen a number slightly less than a quarter. This is because I want 4 tool buttons per row. I've chosen slightly less to account for the gaps between each button. For the height, I've chosen a number slightly less than a third. This is because I want 3 rows visible on the scrolling frame. Now let's change the cell padding property, which is the size of the gaps between each button. Again, make sure you're using scale. Let's create some more duplicates to see how the scrolling frame looks when the canvas height is increased. Now delete all the duplicates, leaving only one button. In the Tool Shop folder, create a folder called GUIs. Put the button inside this folder. We're storing it in the replicated storage so we can use it as a template when we create each button by script. In the screen GUI, create a local script. Let's copy the first couple of lines from the Tool Shop server script. We'll also need the GUIs folder and the button stored inside. Then we'll get the player. We'll get the player's stats folder and their currency value. Now we'll get the screen GUI. And we'll get all the UI elements we're going to need. Create a function called Open Shop. This function will be used to open the shop GUI. Inside, we'll simply set the visible property of the shop container frame to true. You can also add anything else you want to happen when the shop is opened. For example, you could have an animation play when the shop is opened. Next, create a function called close shop. This will be used to close the shop GUI. Inside, we're just setting the visible property to false. Again, you can add any animations or anything else you want to happen when closing the shop. We'll call the close shop function to hide the shop at the start. Now we'll use the mouse button one-click event of the open button. This event fires when the player left-clicks on the button. When this happens, we'll first check the visibility of the frame. If it's visible, it means the shop is open, so we'll close it. Otherwise, we'll open it. If you have any animations playing, you might need to use a variable to store whether the shop is open or not, which you'll be checking rather than the visibility of the frame. We'll use the same event for the close button. This time, we'll only call the close shop function, as the close button will only be clickable when the shop is open. Let's test the game. Now create a function called createButton. This will take a tool folder and we'll create a button for that folder. First, we'll get the properties of the tool. We'll need the display name, image ID, and price. Then create a copy of the button template. We'll replace the text on the tool display name text label with the tool's display name. We'll then replace the image on the image label with the tool's image ID. Finally, we'll replace the text on the tool price text label with the tool's price. We don't want to just show the price, we also want to add some text like a $sign. So we'll create a function called priceToString that will take the price and return a string containing that price. I've decided to put a $sign before the price. Now let's use the function to display onto the tool price text label. We'll return several things in a list. The first is the button we just created. The second is the price. We'll need this so we can sort the buttons based on price. The last is the tool folder for this button. I'll explain later why we're returning the tool folder. Now create a function called createAllButtons. First, create a list to store all the buttons we're going to make. We'll iterate through each tool folder. Create a button using the createButton function. We'll give the tool folder to the function. Then add the result of the function to the buttons list. We're going to be using the table.sort function to sort the list. The first argument is the list to sort. The second argument is the function used to decide how items are sorted. It has two parameters, A and B, which are any two items in the list being compared. The function should return true if A is meant to be before B in the list. In this case, we want true to be returned if the price of A is smaller than the price of B. A and B are both the result of the createButton function, so the price is the second element of each item. Now we can iterate through the sorted list. Notice I've used a proper variable name for the index of the item in the list. We'll be needing this variable later. For now, we're going to access the first element of each item in the list, which is the button. For each button, we'll parent it to the scrolling frame. And this will give us a grid sorted by price, as the UI grid layout object places elements based on the order they were put inside the scrolling frame. Now let's call the createAllButtons function. Let's run the game and open the shop. The tools are displayed correctly. Right now, nothing happens when we click on the buttons. create a function called selectTool, which takes a tool folder. At the top of the script, we need to create a variable to store the currently selected tool folder. We'll be using this variable when the player clicks on the purchase button. When the selectTool function runs, we can replace the value of this variable with the given tool folder. Let's copy the code to get the tool's properties. We'll also need the description for the tool. Now we'll display the tool's properties onto the elements in the selected tool container frame. For the purchase button, we want to display different things depending on if the tool is already owned, if it's too expensive, or if the player can afford it. To check if the player owns a tool, we need to create a list to store the player's purchases. We'll then check if the tool folder is already in the list. The next condition will check if the price is too expensive for the player. Finally, we'll just have an else, meaning the player can afford the tool. We're going to have different appearances for the purchase button based on these conditions. So let's create separate functions to change the appearance of the purchase button. The first is called setPurchaseButtonOwned. It'll set the button's text to owned and give it a dark green color. The second is called setPurchaseButtonAffordable. This will receive the price of the tool. We'll make its color a bright green. Then we'll set its text to the price using the priceToString function. Let's copy the function. This one will instead be called setPurchaseButtonExpensive. And we'll give it a red color. Now we can call these functions under each condition. Head over to the createButton function. We'll respond to the mouseButton1Click event of the button. When it fires, we'll call the selectTool function, giving it the tool folder. Let's test the game. Initially, the placeholder texts and image are shown. We'll fix that next. If we click on any of the tool buttons, the tool is displayed. Let's get some cash by stepping on the part. If we click on a tool we can afford, the purchase button is now green. For tools we can't afford, the button is still red. In the createAllButtons function, we'll make use of the index variable. We'll check if the index is equal to 1. You can use any number here if you want to display a different tool initially. We'll call the selectTool function to display the tool at index 1. We need to give the tool folder, which is the third element we returned in the createButton function. Now if we run the game, we'll see a tool displayed from the start. Right now, clicking on the purchase button won't do anything. Create a function called onPurchaseClicked. We'll first get the properties of the currently selected tool folder. We'll then get the price for the tool. We need to compare the price against the amount of currency the player has. We can then fire the remote event, giving the currently selected tool folder. We need to add the tool folder to the player's purchases. We can also call the setPurchaseButtonOwned function as the player has just bought a tool. Now we'll respond to the mouseButton1Click event of the purchase button. And we also need to make sure the player doesn't already own the tool. Now let's get some cash. Click on the purchase button. The button has changed to owned and we have the tool. We can click the button again and nothing happens since we own the tool. If we gain cash while a tool we can't afford is selected, the button won't change color once we have enough cash. It only changes once we click on the tool button again. We need to respond to the get property change signal event for the player's currency value. We can give this event a string, which is the property to listen for changes in. We're giving the value property, meaning this event will fire when the player's currency changes. First, we need to check if the player owns the tool already. If they do, we don't need to do anything, as the owned text is shown instead of the tool's price. Now we'll get the properties of the selected tool. We'll then get the price for the tool. And we'll compare the price to the amount of currency the player has. If the price is too expensive for the player, we'll call the setPurchaseButtonExpensive function. Otherwise, we'll call the setPurchaseButtonAffordable function. Now we can run the game. Let's select a tool we can't afford yet. Step over the part while the tool is selected. The button changes once we have enough cash. If the video helped, please consider subscribing and liking the video. If you have any ideas for future videos, let me know in the comments. You can also join the Discord server to send your ideas. And also let me know if you want a part 2 where I show you how to save the player's purchases to a data store. Thanks for watching and I hope you have a wonderful day.